Where could you say something different or communicate differently so that you get a different outcome? So you got to change the sequence, change the punctuation. So I've had students who's, it's been as simple as they change it by physically moving closer to the person. So a student will say, well, we always have this fight, and I come in late, and then my father's sitting over there, or my mother's over here, and I just stand over here, and I start walking up the stairs, and we're yelling at each other as we go, And I say, well, where are you going to change it? And they said, well, I'm going to try this. Instead, when I get home, I'm going to go over, and I'm going to sit down right by them. And they don't know what to do. Because it's like, wait a minute, this pattern is not happening again, And so it shifts everything, and you start to communicate differently. And so, sometimes it's just disrupting the pattern by saying things that are nonsensical, too. If you find yourself down, people have done this. You get down this pattern, they say this, you say this, they say this, you say this. Now we're in this thing, and somebody just says, green frogs, purple frogs. And someone goes, what? What are you talking about? And what happened? You just disrupted an oscillation. Now all of a sudden, you're back at a point where maybe you can start to talk again. It sounds stupid, but it happens and it works. This is the way we do things. This is the way people are. So you just disrupt it somehow. I mean, sometimes it happens for you. The phone rings, your cell phone rings, and it breaks it up, and then you can, but if nothing happens, you're just going to keep oscillating in that unproductive pattern. So punctuation becomes important for what Slavic. They say you gotta pay attention to it. So relationships only get better when people are willing to examine, to be able to say, look, I want to talk about what happens every time you come home late. This is what we do. I don't like this. Let's think of a different way to do this. That's meta-communication. Or, I don't like what happens when I come home late. We do this. Can we do something different? How can we do this differently? So we change it by meta-communication instead of being within it. So punctuation. And then they talk about the symmetrical or complementary. Symmetrical or complementary. So this was the one up and one down patterns. I don't know if you've seen this before, but one of the ways you can analyze a conversation between people is as a bid for control or a acquiescence to the control of another in the conversation. So for instance, here's a one up and a one down conversation. I say, where were you? And you say, I went with my friends. That is a complementary exchange. I put out a bid to be in control of what the conversation was going to be, and you bought into it. You said, you answered me. So now I'm in charge of how this conversation is going to go. And I will then say, why didn't you call? And you'll say, well, it was late and I didn't. Well, why didn't you? So this is one way of looking at what's going on. Now, if you had said, where were you? And I say, that's none of your business. I'm taking a bid now. You made a bid to control the exchange, and I just made a response bid that says, I'm not going to let you be in charge of this exchange. I'm going to be in charge of this exchange.
How do you fix that?
Well, at least what this does for you is lets you think about it. Let's start there. That you begin to see hey, I keep falling into these patterns of letting other people choose how these conversations are going to go. They take a bid to be in control, and I just let them go, and I answer them according to it. And so they talk about also complementary or a cross, not one up or one down, but a cross kind of responses that just don't even answer it or challenge it. They just said, what are we having for dinner, or something like that. You don't even go there. So you're just moving across in another way. It's not answering or challenging. Communication. So I've lost my thought here. So we're learning about, and your question was, how do you get out of it?
Oh yeah, how do you get out?
Yeah, how do you get out of it?
You have the one where they say if somebody asks you a
Question, ask them a question,
yeah,
right?
The way to handle that is ask them a question.
Why?
Back.
So they say, where were you?
Yeah.
And I say, well, why is that important to you? Right. So now I'm taking it's a less hostile bid than saying, what business that is yours? But I'm still not buying into the fact that you're one up and I'm one down. So so you ask the question, why is that important to you? And
Or a declaration like you said, it's none of your business.
Right,
That usually stops.
but that can create a hostile exchange. That can set off a hostile exchange.
Which is the better form of communication, though? The up and the down, or the
Well,
up,
it depends.
up, up?
Depends.
On the situation.
Yeah, it depends what you're trying to do and what's going on.
I don't see how that could be good.
But this lets you analyze it at least, because for instance, I had an exchange with a person that ended up in a standstill, and so I took it to a group of people that I work with on analyzing situations, and I said, here's a case, I want you to go over this. And so a group of people, they looked at it and they said, well, right from the get-go, you let them be in control of the whole exchange. They asked and you answered. They asked, you answered. They asked, you answered. Until the point came where you said, I'm not going to answer that, and then they quit. So there's a case of a one up, one down, one up, one down, one up, one down, till finally there's a one up, and it cut off the exchange. Well, what does this do for me? Well, it lets me see more clearly that I may not want to let those kinds of exchanges go on. That I may want to either take a cross view, or I want to change it, or I want to say, I'm not liking the way this is going. I want to change the conversation that we're having. I mean,
It comes along with being very nice, too.
yeah, the one up and down, up and down. You accept the one down situation. And so this lets you examine it if you want to be in that situation. Here's another example from Jewish literature. There's a story in the Jewish Bible about Solomon and people who brought a baby to him. Do you know this story? Solomon is the king and he's the judge, and two women bring a baby, and they say, each of them says, this is my baby. And they can't do DNA testing, because this is thousands of years ago. And so the one makes all of her claims. She says, this is my baby because, and the other one says, well, it's my baby and her baby died. So finally Solomon says, okay, this one says this one says this. And then he says, bring me a sword. So they bring him a sword. And he says, all right, now, you claim it's yours, you claim it's yours. I'm going to take a sword, I'm going to cut the baby in half. I'll give you half, I'll give you half. And so the one says, that's right, she's not going to have this baby. And the other one says, no, let it live, just give it to her. And so Solomon says, okay, now I figured it out. The one who wants it to live is the mother. Give it to that one. So there's a case where you're in kind of this up and down, and you just take a whole nother thing, and it gets you out of the situation. So the game is I make my arguments. The rules are we have to listen to the arguments and make a decision. Solomon in that case brings a whole new direction into it that kind of breaks it up and solves the problem. So that's part of the analysis here, is to recognize if we're in this one up, one down, it's going nowhere, then change it. Go somewhere else with it. You know, say, bring this order, or green frog, or purple, whatever. You know, just break it up so that you go in a new direction and then pay attention to what's going on there. Which is what Weick says. This is why Carl Weick's organizational theory is annoying, because most organizational theories say, all right, study the situation, carefully analyze it, get all the information together, make your decision, and implement your course of action. And Carl Weick says, you know, you've just wasted a whole lot of time. What you need to do is just do something, and then watch what happens, get your feedback, make your adjustments, and then just keep doing things and making adjustments as you go along. Don't try to figure it all out first and get all your information first. Just get in there, start swimming, and make the adjustments as you get feedback about what's going on. So it's two different ways of looking at how you plan things and how you work situations and relationships. All right, there's a lot of examples like that. Solomon's story is an example. Another one is a New Testament story. It's one of the Jesus stories where they bring him a coin. Do you know this story? They bring him they ask him, should we pay taxes or not? Right? Should we pay taxes or not? And if he says, yes, you should pay taxes, then the poor people don't like him anymore. And if he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes, then the Romans are going to arrest him, because he's telling people not to pay taxes. So he's stuck. And so he says, bring me a coin. So he brings a coin, and he says, okay, whose picture is on this coin? And they say, well, that's Caesar's picture on the coin. He says, okay, then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. So he just breaks up the whole, you know, flow. They want him in this thing of, well, we asked you a question, you have to give us an answer. And he just goes in another direction and breaks up the whole thing and creates a new response. So Solomon, you know, there's a lot of good examples in the wisdom literatures of a lot of different things, of people who were skilled at breaking up these oscillations.
How do you solve the problem?
Starting new things. What's that?
How do they solve the problem?
Which problem?
The problem of, like, the taxes.
Well, the taxes, then both people were embarrassed, because the people who were trying to put them in that position looked bad then, because it looked like they were valuing money too much. So it made them stop, because they would look bad. So that's the way that one shaped up. Yeah. All right. So symmetrical. So Watzlawick and his group say, when you do analysis, pay attention to whether these are symmetrical. You know, one down or one. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. We should do this. Well, maybe no. Let's do this. Those are down, down, down. You know, everyone's trying to give the other one the bid for being responsible for what's going on. So you can do that kind of analysis, which is helpful, because you recognize when you're trapped in a system or in a cycle, and you can change it. And so you make adjustments by breaking the patterns and instituting new patterns and talking about how you're communicating what's going on. All right. So in your reflections, what kind of situations would this be useful for doing some analysis of?
Relationships.
Yeah, okay, obviously your interpersonal relationships, this is really useful for. It's really useful for families. You know, think about what goes on. Families or dorm groups. You know, I don't know if you live in suites.
I Like an apartment on campus.
You know, you have 5 or 6 people together. You establish patterns. Maybe some of you are doing small group analysis of bands, or you're doing work teams at work. This is useful because you see what are the patterns we get into, what are the unproductive systems that we establish. Can we talk about how we talk about things? Or do we just get in these things where we make triangles and we all talk about this one person and that leaves them out, and they sense that tension, and so they step up their behaviors. It just all cycles.
What happens if you run into a person that doesn't like to communicate? How do you communicate?
Bad idea.
How do you do that?
Yeah, don't. Well, they would say that a person cannot not communicate. So they are communicating. They maybe can't meta-communicate. You know, they can't talk about how they're communicating. I mean, this can be very bad. I mean, you know, in the rest of my life, not here, I deal with a lot of family counseling. I do a lot of abusive relationships. And people who can't talk hit, right? That's one of the ways they do it. They turn to violence. So, you know, so be careful. If you got someone who can't communicate, you know, just be careful, you know, because communication allows for coordination and working out things. It builds the ability to figure out what to do. A lot of immigrant families don't communicate well. A lot of European families, if they're first generation, don't communicate well because the rules of the game are whatever this one person says, that's the end of the conversation. So we don't talk about where do we all want to go on vacation. So-and-so says, we're going here, and that's where we go. You know, so the game has rules. And then as you get second generation and third generation, it just goes nuts because the grandchildren are disrespectful and all, you know, all this stuff. So, but this gives you a way to make sense of it. So that's why this is useful. All right, so we talked about Weick a little bit. Let's talk about organizations now. So you could think about using this to do your project with a group, you know, where you're doing analysis for some group. This is kind of useful in a lot of cases. This is, yeah, well, go on and on about that. Now, let's talk about organizations. And why would cybernetics be useful for thinking about organizations? Cybernetics asks what kind of questions? In a smaller family, it keeps asking about how does each part affect the other part. So it asks the questions about complex interactions. So that it's never, Weick would say it's never simple enough to say if I do this in every case in an organization, you should just do this and then this will happen. Why would Weick say that's ridiculous? So if I go to a seminar and the person says, if you're having a problem in your organization, do this, and that'll fix it. Weick would say, I don't think so. Right, so Weick would say, that's ridiculous because that organization is unique. There's a unique group of people who bring all these different communication rules. They create their own game that they're playing together with its own rules. And so you make some input and you expect into that organization, and you expect this output. So you go to a seminar and the person tells you, well, if you have this, you just institute this, you do this, 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 and this, and then you will get a well-functioning, productive organization. And Weick says, no, I don't think so. Because you don't know, every organization is different, and in fact, every organization is constantly changing. So this is the idea of the formal and informal organizational structure, right? every organization has an organizational chart. Right? So this is how you do things. This is the district manager, and he report, you know, and 4 area managers report to the district manager, and under each one of them there are these 3, you know, associates who run the local stores, right? And then, right, so you have an organizational chart. Now, it is highly likely that this is not the real way things happen in the organization. This makes rational sense, but it's more likely that this person, in order to get their work done, calls this person up because they met them at a conference somewhere that the company was having. They got along really well. And so when this person needs something, they call this person, who calls that person because they're on an equal level, and then that person gets what they need. Is this the organizational chart? Is that the way it's supposed to function?
That's like true here too.
It's true everywhere. It's true anywhere there are people. You know. So instead of saying, well, you are supposed to go to your immediate supervisor and do it, you say, yeah, but they don't listen to me. But so I've learned that within this organization, within the system, I'll go to this person, they'll talk to that person, and then I'll get what it was that I needed. So you have your formal structure, which is rational, and then you have your informal, which is complex and is built on the idea of what actually works, what actually serves to get things done. I had a friend who worked for ADP Corporation, you know, the payroll people. There was payroll people, ADP. And he was in particular in the trucking services division. So his job was to get accounts with trucking firms to do payroll for them. And he said, we had an organizational chart that told us how things were supposed to happen in the organization. He says, but nothing happened that way. It was all about who knew who and who went to conferences with who and who got along with who, and they would all, and the company worked. You know, the output happened. You know, business grew, people's bills got paid, everything worked. And then, for some reason, the company decided to do an audit trail of decision-making processes. They wanted to see that everyone was complying with the organizational chart. And so all of a sudden, my friend said, we all had to stop getting things done and start following the organizational chart. And so they did it while the audit was in place. Nothing was getting done. And then they stopped that, and everyone went back to doing it and getting it done. So what's that about? It's about a highly complex system where you cannot predict until you do something how it will work. And so the answer, Weick says, is you enter this cycle where you do something, it creates something, you pay attention to that, and then you make a new input, and now you watch what happens, and you keep your feedback, awareness, you keep shifting in order to get the output. And if you're not getting the output, don't keep doing that thing. Don't keep doing the same thing. Because it's not going to produce what you need it to produce. So this is kind of a very different organizational theory about how things should be done. Because most of the time, again, you plan and then you execute. You know, you gather a lot of information and then you think up your answer and then you do it. And he says, no, don't do it that way. Just do something, pay attention to what happens, and then keep making adjustments. It drives managers nuts, but it gets things done in organizations. So the best managers are sometimes the people who tell people, look, this is what I need to have happen. You figure out how to make it happen. And I don't, you know, as long as you don't do this or that, you just make it happen. That's called giving people a sphere of freedom to work in. And if you don't give them a sphere of freedom, we call that micromanaging people.
That's big in sales too.
What?
Don't care how you get the numbers, just get it.
Right, and we may have rules about you can't do this and you can't do that. You can't spend over this much and you can't violate this ethical principle. But between that space, you're free to operate however you want to operate. Yeah. In nonprofit organizations, this is called the Carver governance model, where every person in the organization is given a certain area to work in, and as long as they produce the output, they're free to structure their internal part however they choose to. It doesn't have to meet some, structure like this. So this is the way they work. So Carl Weick says that's the way you've got to work, that organizations function around complex interactions between the people who are actually in them, and you've got to pay attention to the feedback that's coming to you. He talks about two other kinds of information: equivocal and ambiguous. Let's think about these two words for a minute in terms of messages. What does equivocal mean? Anybody know what equivocal is about?
For the most part, it means the same thing.
What's that?
For the most part, it means the same thing.
Well, it means it could mean this or it could mean that. Okay? So if I get an equivocal message, let's say in an organization, equivocal message would be, make sure you get your papers in for the new health plan. So someone says, make sure you get your papers in for a new health plan. Well, should I do it right now or should I wait till later? Does it have to be done or doesn't it have to be done? I don't understand what's going on. There's an ambiguity in it. There's not enough information for me to know what the message was. So if you have an ambiguous message, you don't have enough information to deal with it. And so in some cases you need more information. In some cases though, what you need is a bigger frame for understanding that message. So you need to understand that within our organization, when you hear something, you need to pay attention because the messages that come out are not always as strong as they should be, but you need to pay attention. So that message comes in and it's equivocal, but the context tells you this is serious, you better do it. So you have a filter within the organization that explains the message to you, tells you how to take it. The context tells you how to take the message. This is like, take the garbage out or you better clean up. How do you take that? Well, you take it on the basis of a bigger relationship. So in organizations it works the same way. That messages will be interpreted on the basis of history and larger understandings of what's going on in the organization. So again, what are you going to do with this? Well, you may go to an organization with your project and they say to you, we tell people to do things and nobody does it. We tell people that the health plan is out, but nobody's following up on it. And you say, I understand now something, about that it's complex, that there are messages that organizations feel are equivocal. There may be a history within the company that if you do things, nothing happens anyway, or they lose your paperwork or whatever. So you begin to look at the question about how is this message interpreted in terms of its content and its relationship to the organization. And then you go to your organization later and you say, okay, look, here's what's going on. People don't know how to interpret your messages because there's a history of you know, different kind of responses to when people fill out paperwork, and they think that nothing gets done, and so they ignore the messages. So where are you going to fix this? If you're management, what are you going to do? You're going to yell at people more because they're not filling out the paper? No, that's going to be unproductive. That's going to set up a cycle of unproductive conflict. So you solve the problem. You solve whatever it is. You institute a good process for paperwork being processed, and then they know. So you attack the problem at a different place. This is a very strong part of systems and cybernetics, that the solution is probably remote from the problem. Like in Mike, right? In Mike's case, is the solution with Mike in that case? Where